The smell of fish clung to Wei's hands no matter how hard he scrubbed them. He had tried everything: lemon juice, baking soda, even that expensive hand soap his cousin had given him for his birthday. Nothing worked. After 12 years selling fish at the harbor market, the scent had become part of him, like an unwanted shadow that refused to leave. Wei filled his sink with steaming hot water, adding a generous splash of vinegar before plunging his raw, chapped hands into the mixture. He winced slightly as the liquid found the small cuts around his fingernails, battle scars from gutting hundreds of fish each day. This was his nightly ritual, one more attempt to wash away the day's work before collapsing into bed. His tiny apartment sat directly above Song's music shop, a fortunate accident of affordable housing in the increasingly expensive coastal town of Port Haven. The shop closed at 6 each evening, but on Tuesdays and Thursdays piano lessons continued until 8. Wei had developed a habit of sitting quietly on his floor during these lessons, ear pressed to the wooden boards, soaking in every note and correction. No, softer on the transitions, Mrs. Song would say to her students. Feel the music flow through your fingers like water. Wei would mimic the movement with his own fingers, imagining cool, clean water instead of fish scales beneath his hands. He had never touched a real piano, yet in his mind he played beautifully. The morning alarm blared at 4:30 a.m., as it did 6 days a week. Wei rolled from his bed with practiced efficiency, splashing cold water on his face before pulling on his work clothes, heavy canvas pants and a thick sweater that would soon smell like the ocean despite being freshly washed. He ate a quick breakfast of leftover rice and pickled vegetables while standing at his small kitchen counter. Outside, the streets were dark and empty, save for other market workers making their way toward the harbor. Wei nodded at the familiar faces: Lin from the vegetable stand, old Mr. Chen who sold tea, and Huang who ran the noodle shop that wouldn't open for hours yet. They were all part of the invisible morning army that fed the town. "Morning, fish boy," called Huang with a wave. The nickname had started as a joke years ago, but had stuck. Wei didn't mind, there were worse things to be called. "Your noodles too salty yesterday," Wei replied with a small smile. This too was part of their morning ritual, the good-natured complaints that masked genuine friendship. The fish market was already humming with activity when Wei arrived. Boats had come in during the night, and the morning auction would begin soon. Wei walked the concrete floor, inspecting today's catch with an expert eye. He had learned from his father to look for the shine in the eyes, the brightness of the gills, the firmness of the flesh. Each detail told a story about when the fish was caught and how fresh it might be. "Wei, over here." The voice belonged to Captain Teng, an older fisherman whose small boat brought in some of the best catches. "Got something special today." Wei made his way through the crowd to where Teng stood proudly beside a massive tuna, its silver-blue skin catching the harsh market lights. "Beautiful," Wei said simply, running a practiced hand along the fish's side. "Fought for 3 hours to land this one," Teng said, his weathered face creasing with pride. "Thought you might want first pick before the fancy restaurant buyers arrive." Wei nodded, already calculating what he could afford to pay and how much he might sell it for at his stall. The deal was made with few words and a handshake. The way business had been done here for generations. By 6, Wei had his stall arranged perfectly, ice glistening beneath rows of fish, prices written in his neat hand on small cards, his special marinade bottles lined up for customers who wanted their fish prepared with his secret blend of spices. He took pride in his presentation, even if some customers held their noses as they approached. The morning rush brought the usual faces: restaurant workers buying for the day's menu, elderly women who inspected every fish with suspicious eyes before selecting the perfect one, young couples who needed help figuring out how to cook their purchase. "Make sure you don't overcook it," Wei told a nervous young man buying sea bass. "Just 4 minutes each side in a hot pan with butter and thyme." "Won't it still be raw inside?" the man asked doubtfully. "That's how fish should be, just barely cooked through. Trust me." Wei wrapped the fish carefully in paper, then plastic to prevent leaks. "Come back tomorrow and tell me how it turned out." By midday, the market grew busier with office workers on lunch, breaks and tourists taking photos of the authentic local experience. It was around this time that Wei became most aware of the invisible barrier between himself and the customers who wrinkled their noses as they approached his stall. "Do you have anything caught today?" asked a woman in expensive sunglasses, holding a designer purse close to her body as if Wei might somehow contaminate it. "All caught last night, madam. Couldn't be fresher." Wei gestured to his display. She leaned forward to examine a red snapper, then pulled back quickly. "The smell is rather strong, isn't it?" Wei smiled politely, used to such comments. Fresh fish should smell like the ocean, not like fish. If it smells fishy, it's not fresh. "Well, you smell fishy," muttered a man beside her, just loud enough for Wei to hear. Wei pretended not to notice, keeping his customer service smile firmly in place as he asked, "Would you like to purchase the snapper?" The woman shook her head and moved on, pulling her companion away. Wei watched them stop at a nearby stall selling overpriced local crafts, their laughter drifting back to him. During a rare quiet moment in the afternoon, Wei unwrapped his simple lunch and sat on a stool behind his counter. He ate methodically while watching a young street musician playing guitar near the market entrance. The boy couldn't be more than 16, but his fingers moved confidently across the strings, drawing a small crowd of appreciative tourists who dropped coins into his open case. Wei wondered what it would feel like to create something that made people gather around in admiration rather than step back in distaste. His fingers tapped silently against his knee, playing imaginary piano keys to match the guitarist's rhythm. "Wei, stop daydreaming and help me with this." The voice belonged to his friend May, who ran the crab and shellfish stall beside his. She was struggling with a large cooler that had arrived late from one of the boats. Wei jumped up, wiping his hands on his apron before helping her heave the heavy container onto her display table. Inside, dozens of crabs scrambled over each other, claws bound with twine. "You should hire someone to help you," Wei said, watching her arrange the crabs with quick, efficient movements. May snorted. "Says the man who does everything himself. That's different. I don't have anything this heavy." "No, you're just too stubborn to admit you work too hard." May paused, looking at him closely. "You look tired." "Are you sleeping enough?" We shrugged. "I sleep fine. Liar, I bet you were up listening to that piano again." Wei didn't answer, which was answer enough. May shook her head but didn't press further. She was one of the few people who knew about his secret love of music, having once arrived at his apartment unexpectedly during a lesson downstairs. The afternoon crawled by as the market gradually emptied of its morning bounty. Wei reduced prices on the few remaining fish, not wanting to take anything home. By 5 o'clock he had sold everything except 2 small mackerel, which he wrapped for his own dinner. Cleaning the stall took another hour, scrubbing down surfaces with bleach, hosing away scales and bits of fish, packing away his knives and equipment securely. While other vendors hurried through their closing routines, eager to get home, Wei cleaned methodically, taking pride in leaving his space spotless. As he finally locked his storage cabinet, we noticed a flyer taped to one of the market pillars. "Community Harbor Celebration," it announced in bold letters. "This Saturday, food, music, and fireworks to honor our maritime heritage." Wei stared at the paper, particularly at the small image of a grand piano printed in one corner. The event would be held at the town hall, a place Wei had never visited despite living in Port Haven his whole life. Something stirred inside him. Curiosity, perhaps, or a longing for something beyond his daily routine. On his walk home, Wei passed by Song's music shop, just as a student was finishing a lesson. The notes of a familiar melody drifted through the open window. Debussy's Clair de Lune, one of Wei's favorites. He slowed his pace, letting the music wash over him like gentle waves. Mrs. Song appeared in the doorway as Wei passed. "Good evening, Wei," she called. Wei nodded politely, suddenly self-conscious about his work clothes and the lingering smell that surely reached her sensitive nose. "You know," she said with a knowing smile, "if you're interested in music, you could come inside instead of listening through your floorboards." Wei felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. I wouldn't want to disturb." "Nonsense. Music is for everyone, fishy hands or not." She laughed kindly at his startled expression. "Yes, I know about your job. This is a small town, Wei." He managed a small smile. "Maybe someday," he said, knowing he probably never would find the courage. That night, as Wei soaked his hands in yet another attempt to remove the fish smell, he made a decision. He would go to the harbor celebration on Saturday. Not to play the piano, that was a ridiculous thought, but perhaps just to listen, to be part of something beyond the market for once. He fell asleep with the sound of Clair de Lune playing in his head. his fingers twitching slightly on the worn blanket as they traced the notes of a song he had never played, but somehow knew by heart. Saturday arrived with unexpected nerves fluttering in Wei's stomach. He had closed his stall early for the first time in years, leaving May staring after him in surprise when he packed up at 3 instead of his usual 6. "Are you sick?" she had asked, pressing a hand to his forehead. "You never leave early." "I'm going to the harbor celebration," Wei had admitted almost shyly. May's eyebrows shot up. "You at a town gathering? With people?" She grinned. "Well, look at you. Finally joining the land of the living." Now, standing in his tiny bathroom, Wei frowned at his reflection. He had showered twice, scrubbing his skin until it was pink, and washed his hair with lemon-scented shampoo. Despite his efforts, he imagined he could still detect the faint smell of fish clinging to him like an unwanted friend. He had exactly 3 outfits that weren't work clothes. After trying them all, he settled on dark blue pants and a simple gray button-up shirt that his mother had given him 2 birthdays ago. The collar was slightly frayed, but it was the nicest thing he owned. "You look ridiculous," he told his reflection, unused to seeing himself dressed this way. His hands, despite the extra scrubbing, remained rough and chapped, with tiny scars mapping years of knife work. No amount of dressing up could hide what he was, a fishmonger, born and raised. For a moment, Wei considered staying home. He could make tea, listen to the radio, maybe clean out the small refrigerator that needed attention, safe familiar tasks that wouldn't require facing the stares of townspeople who only knew him as the fish guy. A sudden burst of piano music floated up through his floorboards, Mrs. Song giving a late afternoon lesson. The melody was bright and cheerful, nothing like the usual practice pieces. Wei closed his eyes, letting the notes wash over him. "Fine," he muttered to himself. "I'll go, just for a little while." The town hall stood at the center of Port Haven, a handsome brick building with white columns and large windows that glowed with golden light as evening approached. Paper lanterns strung between trees lit the pathways leading to the entrance, where a banner proclaimed 175th Annual Harbor Celebration in bold blue letters. Wei hesitated at the edge of the gathering crowd. He recognized many faces. Customers from the market, shop owners from downtown, fishermen he nodded to each morning at the docks. In their evening clothes, away from their work, they looked different. He wondered if he looked different too, or if the smell of fish announced his identity before his face did. "Wei, you actually came." Huang from the noodle shop appeared at his side, clapping him on the shoulder. He was dressed in a bright red shirt and held a cup of something that smelled strongly of alcohol. "I've never seen you at one of these before." Wei managed a small smile. "First time for everything. Well, come on then. Food's inside and they've got local wine from the Hill Vineyards. Not bad stuff even if it's overpriced." Grateful for the friendly face, Wei followed Huang into the hall. The space had been transformed with blue and white decorations. Fishing nets hung from the ceiling, interwoven with tiny lights that resembled stars. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while the other side held a small stage where a local band was setting up instruments. And there, in the center of the stage, stood a gleaming black grand piano. Wei's eyes fixed on it immediately. It was nothing like the upright piano in Mrs. Song's shop. This was an elegant creature, its curved body reflecting the overhead lights, its keyboard exposed like a row of perfect teeth waiting for a touch. "Earth to Wei." Huang waved a hand in front of his face. "I asked if you wanted a drink." "Oh, yes, thank you." Wei tore his gaze away from the piano. "Just one, though." As Huang disappeared toward the drinks table, Wei found himself a quiet corner where he could observe without being noticed. The room was filling quickly with Port Haven's residents. Fishing families who had lived here for generations, mingling with newer folks who had discovered the town's charm and decided to stay. Mayor Liu arrived to appreciative applause, his round face beaming as he shook hands and patted backs. The bank manager and his wife came next, followed by the owner of the luxury hotel that had opened last year on the cliffs overlooking the harbor. Wei sipped the wine Huang had brought him, feeling increasingly out of place. These were people who bought fish, not people who smelled like fish. He should have stayed home. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mayor Liu had taken the microphone. "Welcome to our 175th Harbor Celebration. Tonight we honor the maritime heritage that built our beautiful town, and the hard-working men and women who continue that tradition today." Polite applause followed. We noticed that while the mayor spoke of honoring fishermen and dock workers, none seemed to be present except himself and a few others hovering near the edges of the room. Please enjoy the food prepared by our local restaurants, the wine from Hillhaven Vineyards, and the music of our very own Port Melodies Band. Later tonight, Professor Lee from the Coastal University will perform several classical pieces on this magnificent piano, on loan from the university's music department. More applause. Wei's attention returned to the piano. Professor Lee was a name he knew. Mrs. Song mentioned him often as the finest pianist in the region. The thought of hearing a real professional play made Wei's earlier discomfort seem worthwhile. The evening progressed with speeches about the town's history, acknowledgments of prominent citizens, and announcements about upcoming harbor improvements. Wei managed to remain mostly invisible in his corner, nodding occasionally to familiar faces but avoiding conversation. The food was excellent, much better than what he usually made for himself. He tried small portions of dishes from all the local restaurants, including Huang's famous dumplings, which tasted even better in formal surroundings than they did from a market stall. As he was considering whether to try a second helping of steamed fish with ginger, ironically, his favorite food despite spending his days surrounded by fish, a commotion near the entrance caught his attention. A large group had arrived, led by a tall woman Wei recognized immediately. Victoria Zhang owned the largest seafood export business in the region and was one of the wealthiest people in town. She rarely came to the market herself, sending employees instead, but when she did, everyone noticed. She wore an elegant blue dress that reminded Wei of deep water, and jewelry that sparkled like sun on waves. "Ah, the money has arrived," Huang muttered, appearing again at Wei's side. "Now the real party can start." Victoria's group moved through the room like a current, people parting and nodding respectfully as they passed. They claimed a table near the front, closest to the stage, and servers immediately brought them wine and food. "She's the one who's been buying up all the waterfront properties," Huang continued. "Rumor is she's planning to renovate the entire harbor area, make it more upscale, whatever that means." Wei frowned. "What about the market?" "Who knows? But I wouldn't be surprised if we all get fancy new stalls with higher rent." Huang shrugged. "Progress, they call it." The band began to play, a lively tune that had several couples moving to the small dance floor. Wei watched, fascinated by how different everyone looked here, relaxed, happy, free from the daily pressures of work. Even Huang seemed transformed, tapping his foot to the music. "I'm going to find Lin from the vegetable stand," Huang said with a wink. "I heard she's wearing a dress tonight and I want to see if she'll dance with me." Alone again, Wei drifted closer to the stage, drawn by the music and the presence of the piano. From this new vantage point, he could overhear snippets of conversation from Victoria Zhang's table. "Renovation plans are moving forward. The board approved the funding yesterday," Victoria was saying to Mayor Liu, who had joined their table. "Wonderful news. The harbor area certainly needs modernizing," the mayor replied. "Yes, though some of the current vendors may need to be relocated," Victoria said, her voice dropping slightly. "The fish market in particular has become somewhat problematic. The smell deters tourists from the nicer shops nearby." Wei froze, his half-empty plate forgotten in his hands. "A shame," agreed a man at Victoria's table. "I walked through there last week and had to have my suit cleaned afterward. Reeked of fish for days." Light laughter rippled around the table. Wei felt his face grow hot. They were talking about his livelihood, his family's business for generations, as if it were garbage to be cleared away. "Perhaps we could move it further down the coast," suggested the mayor. "There's that unused area past the old cannery." Wei knew the spot, a good 20-minute walk from the center of town, where few tourists would bother to venture. It would kill half the vendors' businesses, his included. The band finished their set with a flourish and applause filled the room. Mayor Liu returned to the microphone to introduce Professor Lee, who walked onto the stage with the confident air of someone used to performing. He was an older man with silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed glasses, dressed in a formal black suit. The room quieted as he sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands above the keys. Then, like magic, music filled the hall, a complex, beautiful piece that Wei recognized as Bach. The professor's fingers moved with precision and grace, creating sounds more perfect than anything Wei had heard through his floorboards. Despite His churning thoughts about the market's future, Wei found himself captivated. He moved closer to the stage, watching those hands fly across the keys, creating a world of sound from simple movements. When the piece ended, enthusiastic applause erupted. Professor Lee smiled modestly and began a second selection, this one slower and more emotional. Chopin, Wei thought, though he wasn't certain. During this piece, Wei became aware of movement beside him. Victoria Zhang had left her table and now stood a few feet away, also watching the performance intently. Up close, she was younger than Wei had thought, perhaps only a few years older than his 32 years. As the music swelled to a particularly moving passage, Wei closed his eyes, letting the notes wash through him. When he opened them, he found Victoria looking at him with a curious expression. "You enjoy classical music?" she asked quietly when their eyes met. Startled that she would speak to him, Wei nodded. "Very much." She studied him for a moment. "Do we know each other? You seem familiar." Before Wei could answer, the piece ended and applause broke out again. Victoria turned her attention back to the stage as Professor Lee announced his final selection, Debussy's Clair de Lune. Wei's heart leapt. His favorite piece, the one he had listened to countless times through his floor, the one his fingers played on imaginary keys when he couldn't sleep. The first notes fell like gentle raindrops, soft and delicate. Wei held his breath, transported by the beauty of the sound. This was how the piece should be played, with reverence and understanding. But as the music continued, a frown creased Wei's forehead. The professor's interpretation was technically perfect, but something was missing. The emotion, the soul, of the piece seemed absent, as if Lee were reading notes rather than feeling them. Without thinking, Wei's fingers began to move at his sides, playing along with the music, adding the heart he felt was missing. "You play?" Victoria whispered, noticing his movements. Wei dropped his hands immediately, embarrassed. "No, you're the fishmonger?" she said suddenly, recognition dawning in her eyes, "from the Central Market." The way she said it, like discovering something unpleasant, made all of Wei's earlier insecurities rush back. He was suddenly acutely aware of his frayed collar, his work-roughened hands, and the lingering scent that probably still clung to him despite his best efforts. "Excuse me," he muttered, stepping away from her. "I need some air." He moved quickly toward the exit, no longer hearing the music, only the echo of Victoria's voice identifying him not as a person who appreciated beautiful music, but as the fishmonger who didn't belong in this room. Wei pushed through the crowd, mumbling apologies as he bumped shoulders and stepped on toes. His face burned with shame. What had he been thinking coming here? These weren't his people. This wasn't his world. The evening air hit his face like a welcome splash of cold water as he stumbled onto the town hall steps. He loosened his collar and took several deep breaths, trying to slow his racing heart. Behind him, through the open doors, the final notes of Clair de Lune drifted into the night, followed by enthusiastic applause. Wei closed his eyes, letting the last of the music wash over him before it faded away. Leaving so soon? Wei's eyes snapped open. Mrs. Song stood at the bottom of the steps looking up at him with a knowing expression. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her usual teaching clothes, making her seem younger somehow. Yes," Wei stammered. "It's getting late." Mrs. Song climbed the steps until she stood beside him. "Professor Lee plays well, doesn't he? Very technically correct." Wei hesitated, then nodded. "But?" she prompted. "But nothing. He's a professional. I'm sure he plays perfectly." Mrs. Song laughed softly. "There's perfect, and then there's moving. Sometimes they're not the same thing." She studied Wei's face. "You didn't think his Debussy had heart." It wasn't a question. Wei glanced at her, surprised. "How did you know?" "Because I saw your hands." She gestured to where Wei's fingers rested on the stone balustrade. "They were playing what your heart heard, not what your ears did." Inside, the crowd began to move around. The concert portion of the evening had ended, and now the band was starting up again with livelier music for dancing. "I should go," Wei said, suddenly worried about running into Victoria Zhang again. "Wait." Mrs. Song touched his arm. Why not play something before you leave? Wei stared at her as if she'd suggested he fly to the moon. What? No, I can't. Of course you can. I've heard how your fingers move to the music through my ceiling. You've been listening to lessons for what, 5 years now? 7, Wei admitted. But listening isn't playing. I've never even touched a real piano. Mrs. Song's eyes widened. Never? Not once? Wei shook his head. Then it's definitely time you did. She took his hand and gave it a gentle tug toward the door. Come on, most people are moving to the dance floor. The piano is free. Mrs. Song, please, Wei protested, pulling back. I can't just walk up there and... Why not? It's a community celebration. Anyone can participate. Because I'm a fishmonger. Because I smell like fish and have rough hands and don't belong here. The words burst out before Wei could stop them. Mrs. Song's expression softened. Wei, do you know why I opened my music shop in Port Haven instead of in the city, where I could make more money teaching wealthy children? Wei shook his head. Because music belongs to everyone, not just to professors and wealthy people who can afford concert tickets. It belongs to fishmongers too. She held out her hand again. Just one song. Play what you feel. Wei looked at her outstretched hand, then back at the door where light and music spilled out. His heart hammered in his chest. I'll probably embarrass myself, he said quietly. Mrs. Song smiled. Maybe, or maybe not. Either way, you'll have touched a piano for the first time. Isn't that worth a little risk? Something shifted inside Wei, a tiny spark of courage igniting. He took a deep breath and placed his calloused hand in Mrs. Song's smooth one. Okay. One song. They re-entered the hall together. As Mrs. Song had predicted, most people had moved away from the stage area to the dance floor where the band played a lively tune. A few older guests sat at tables near the stage, chatting and sipping wine. The grand piano stood unattended, its lid still raised from Professor Lee's performance. Mrs. Song led Wei toward it, moving with purposeful steps that discouraged interruption. Wei followed, his legs feeling strangely wooden. As they approached the stage, he caught sight of Victoria Zhang's table. She wasn't there, but several of her friends remained, laughing over what appeared to be a third or fourth round of drinks. Go on, Mrs. Song whispered, giving Wei a gentle push toward the small steps leading to the stage. Wei climbed them slowly, feeling exposed under the stage lights. The piano waited for him, its black and white keys gleaming. He approached it cautiously, as if it might disappear if he moved too quickly. The piano bench was still warm from Professor Lee's performance. Wei sat down, adjusting his position as he had seen students do in Mrs. Song's shop. The keyboard stretched before him, both familiar and utterly foreign. He lifted his hands, then hesitated, suddenly aware of how rough and scarred they looked under the bright lights. These were hands that gutted fish and chopped ice, not hands meant for creating beauty. From the corner of his eye, he saw Mrs. Song give him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Wei placed his fingers on the keys. The first touch was a revelation, cool, smooth ivory beneath his fingertips, offering just the right amount of resistance. He pressed gently, and a clear, perfect note rang out. The sound startled him. It was so much richer, so much more present than what he heard through his floorboards. Wei played another note, then another, getting used to the feel of the keys. These tentative sounds caught the attention of the older guests at nearby tables. A few turned to look, curiosity on their faces. Nervousness threatened to overwhelm him. Wei closed his eyes, shutting out the watching faces and the unfamiliar surroundings. In his mind, he was back in his small apartment listening to Claire de Lune filtering up through the floor. He remembered how the piece should sound, not technically perfect like Professor Lee's version, but alive with emotion. His fingers began to move, finding the opening notes of Debussy's masterpiece. The first few measures were hesitant, slightly uneven as he adjusted to the piano's touch. But then muscle memory from countless hours of imaginary playing took over, and the music began to flow. Wei lost himself in the piece, his hands moving across the keyboard with growing confidence. The music spoke of moonlight on water, of quiet beauty and gentle longing, feelings he had never been able to express with words, but could somehow translate through his fingers. He forgot about his rough hands and the lingering scent of fish. He forgot about Victoria Jang and her plans to relocate the market. He forgot about being a fishmonger who didn't belong in fancy gatherings. For these precious minutes, he was simply a man playing music that moved his soul. The middle section of the piece grew more complex, with overlapping melodies and shifting harmonies. Wei navigated them instinctively, not with the technical precision of a trained pianist, but with the heartfelt understanding of someone who had lived with the music for years. As he reached the piece's climax, Wei opened his eyes, his fingers still moving across the keys. The sight that greeted him nearly made him stumble. A crowd had gathered around the piano, watching in silent amazement. The band had stopped playing, and people had drifted over from the dance floor, drawn by the unexpected music. Among the watching faces, Wei saw Huang, mouth slightly open in surprise. Mayor Liu stood nearby, wineglass frozen halfway to his lips, and there at the edge of the stage stood Victoria Jang, her expression unreadable as she stared at Wei's hands moving across the keyboard. For a terrifying moment, Wei thought he would lose his place in the music. Then he saw Mrs. Song smiling proudly, and something steadied inside him. He returned his focus to the piano, to the feeling of the keys beneath his fingers, to the beauty of Debussy's creation. The final section of Clair de Lune is a return to the gentle opening theme, like a quiet sigh of contentment. We played it with delicate touch, letting the notes hang in the air like stars appearing at twilight. The last chords faded away into silence, a silence so complete that Wei could hear his own heartbeat. For 3 eternal seconds, no one moved or spoke. We sat motionless at the piano, hands still resting on the final chord, certain he had made a terrible mistake. Then Mrs. Song began to applaud. The sound broke the spell. Suddenly, the entire room erupted in applause. Not the polite, measured clapping that had followed Professor Li's performance, but enthusiastic, almost shocked appreciation. We rose from the bench, unsure what to do. He gave an awkward bow, his face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and unexpected pride. "That was beautiful," someone called out. "Where did you learn to play like that?" asked another voice. We looked helplessly at Mrs. Song, who came to his rescue by climbing onto the stage beside him. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "this is Wei Chen, one of our town's finest fishmongers, and as you can hear, a natural musician." More applause followed. Wei wanted to disappear into the floor. He had never had so many eyes on him before, never been the center of attention like this. "Play something else," someone shouted from the back of the room. Wei shook his head. "I don't know anything else," he admitted. "Not really. Nonsense," Mrs. Song whispered. "What about that Chopin piece you were tapping out on my counter last month when you came to fix my sink?" "That was just..." Wei trailed off. How could he explain that he sometimes played pieces he had never actually performed, just felt in his heart? Before he could protest further, Mayor Liu had joined them on stage, beaming broadly as if Wei's performance had been his idea. "What a wonderful surprise," he announced. "This is exactly what our harbor celebration is about, discovering the hidden talents in our community." We caught sight of Victoria Jang moving closer to the stage, her eyes never leaving his face. There was something different in her expression now. Curiosity, perhaps, or reassessment. As the mayor continued speaking about community spirit and local talent, Wei felt a strange mixture of emotions wash over him. Embarrassment, yes, and lingering disbelief at what he had done. But underneath those feelings ran something new and unfamiliar, a sense of possibility, as if a door had opened that he hadn't known existed. For the first time in his life, people were looking at him and seeing something other than just a fishmonger. They were seeing Wei Chen, the man who could make a piano sing. The days following the harbor celebration passed in a strange blur for Wei. He returned to his fish stall each morning at the usual hour, gutted and filleted with the same practiced efficiency, and wrapped purchases in paper with the same care he always had. Yet something fundamental had shifted, both in how others saw him and how he saw himself. News of the fishmonger pianist spread through Port Haven like wind through fishing nets. Customers who had previously held their breath while making purchases now lingered, asking Wei about music and how he had learned to play. Some even requested that he handle their fish personally, as if his touch might somehow be special. "You're a local celebrity now," May teased him on Tuesday morning as she arranged crabs in neat rows. "I should charge people just to stand next to your stall." Wei shook his head, embarrassed by the attention. "It will blow over soon. Next week, someone's pet will do a trick on the pier, and everyone will forget about me." "I don't think so," May said, glancing meaningfully past Wei's shoulder. He turned to find Mrs. Song approaching his stall, navigating the busy market with purpose. She carried a large cloth bag and wore the determined expression of someone with a mission. "Good morning, Wei," she called, smiling broadly. "Busy day?" "The usual," Wei replied, wiping his hands on his apron. "Can I help you with something?" "Some fresh tuna came in this morning." Mrs. Song waved away the offer. "I'm not here for fish. I'm here for you." She placed her bag on the counter and pulled out a stack of papers. "Sheet music. For you to practice." Wei stared at the papers, then looked around self-consciously. Several nearby customers were watching with interest. "Mrs. Song, I appreciate the thought, but I don't even have a piano." "Which brings me to my second point." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "The music shop is closed on Mondays. From now on, that's your practice day. Come at 9 in the morning and you can use the teaching piano until I open at noon." Wei's heart jumped at the offer, but doubt quickly followed. "I can't accept that. You run a business. I should pay for lessons, or did I mention lessons?" Mrs. Song raised an eyebrow. "I'm offering you piano time, not teaching. Though," she added with a sly smile, "I might pop in now and then to offer suggestions, if you don't mind." Before Wei could respond, a new customer approached the stall, Mrs. Jiang, the baker's wife, who had been buying fish from Wei's family since before he was born. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble. "Lin from the vegetable stand says you played at town hall and made half the room cry." Wei felt his face grow hot. "I just played one piece. It wasn't anything special." "One piece was enough," Mrs. Song said firmly. "So do we have an agreement?" Mondays at 9, trapped between Mrs. Song's expectant gaze and Mrs. Jiang's curious one, Wei found himself nodding. "Mondays at 9, Mrs. Song beamed. "Excellent. I'll leave these with you." She patted the stack of music. "Start with the Debussy collection. You already know one piece. Might as well learn the others." As she walked away, Mrs. Jiang leaned closer. "I've been buying fish in this market for 40 years, she said, "and I never would have guessed we had a pianist in our midst." "What other secrets are you hiding, Wei Chen?" The question followed Wei throughout the day, echoing in his mind as he worked. What other secrets was he hiding even from himself? What other possibilities had he never considered because he was just a fishmonger? By closing time, Wei's hands ached more than usual, and a headache pressed behind his eyes. The day had been busier than normal, with many customers coming specifically to see the piano man, as some had taken to calling him. While the attention brought more sales, it also meant more questions, more explanations, more performing of a role he wasn't sure how to play. As he was hosing down his stall, a familiar voice cut through the spray of water. "Mr. Chen?" Wei turned to find Victoria Zhang standing a careful distance away, dressed in a simple but obviously expensive blue suit. Unlike her usual visits to the market, she was alone, without assistants or business associates. Wei switched off the hose, suddenly aware of his soaked apron and the fish scales clinging to his arms. "Ms. Zhang," he said with a small nod. "Can I help you with something?" "I hope I'm not interrupting your closing routine," she said, glancing at the half-cleaned stall. "Just finishing up." An awkward silence fell between them. Victoria seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "I wanted to talk to you about your performance at the harbor celebration," she finally said. "It was unexpected." Wei wasn't sure how to respond to that. "I've never played in public before. Never played at all, from what I hear." Victoria's eyes held a curious intensity. "Is it true you taught yourself just by listening through your floor?" We shrugged uncomfortably. "I didn't really teach myself. I just felt the music." Victoria nodded as if he had confirmed something important. "That's what made it different. Everyone could tell." She paused. "I owe you an apology." This was the last thing Wei had expected. "For what?" "For my reaction when I recognized you at the celebration. It was rude." Wei remembered the moment, the way her expression had changed when she realized he was the fishmonger. The memory still stung. "It's fine," he said, turning back to his cleaning. I'm used to it. That's exactly the problem, Victoria said, taking a step closer. You shouldn't be used to being treated that way. No one should. Wei stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. There was something different about her today. A lack of the usual polished confidence replaced by what almost seemed like nervousness. Why are you really here, Ms. Zhang? He asked. Victoria took a deep breath. 2 reasons. First, to invite you to play at the reopening of the Golden Harbor Hotel next month. We've renovated the lobby and installed a grand piano. It would be a paid performance, of course. We blinked in surprise. You want me to play? At your hotel? The guests would love it. A local fisherman with natural talent. It's exactly the kind of authentic experience visitors to Port Haven are looking for. Wei felt a flicker of disappointment. So he would be a novelty act, a local curiosity to entertain wealthy tourists. And the second reason? He asked, his voice cooler than before. Victoria hesitated. To discuss the harbor renovation plans. There it was. Wei's back stiffened. The ones that would relocate the fish market? Yes. Victoria met his gaze directly. But not in the way you might have heard. From her handbag, she pulled out a folded document and handed it to Wei. He hesitated before taking it with damp hands. What is this? The actual proposal. Not the rumors or the simplified version the mayor described. She gestured to the paper. Take a look. Wei unfolded the document to find architectural drawings of a redesigned harbor area. To his surprise, the fish market remained in its central location, though the structures had been updated with new roofing and improved stalls. Next to it was a new open-air plaza with seating areas and what looked like a permanent performance space. I don't understand, Wei said, looking up from the plans. I heard you talking about relocating the market because of the smell. Victoria winced slightly. Those weren't my words. That was Robert Chen. He's a hotel developer from the city who wants to turn the entire harbor into luxury condominiums. His proposal is competing with mine. And yours keeps the market where it is? With improvements, Victoria confirmed. Better facilities, proper drainage systems, waste management, things that would help with the odor issue without removing what makes Port Haven special. She gestured to the document. The fish market is the heart of this town. Moving it would be like removing Port Haven's soul. Wei studied the plans more carefully. The proposed changes would indeed improve the market while maintaining its character. The new performance space caught his eye, a covered pavilion with what appeared to be a weather-protected piano. You added this recently, he said, pointing to the pavilion. After the celebration, Victoria's lips curved in a small smile. I may have made a few adjustments after Saturday night. Your performance gave me an idea. What if the market could be more than just a place to buy fish? What if it could also be a place for community and culture? Wei handed the plans back to her, mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Why show me this? I'm just one vendor. I don't make decisions about the harbor. Because people listen to you now, Victoria said simply. After what happened at the celebration, you have a voice in this community. And because... She paused, looking slightly embarrassed. I wanted you to know I'm not the villain in this story. Before Wei could respond, a voice called from the market entrance. Vicky, there you are. They both turned to see a tall, well-dressed man striding toward them, his expensive shoes looking out of place on the wet market floor. We recognized him as one of the people from Victoria's table at the celebration. Robert, Victoria said, her tone noticeably cooling. What are you doing here? Looking for you, of course. Robert Chen reached them, wrinkling his nose slightly at the market smells. Your assistant said you might be here, though I can't imagine why. His eyes flicked dismissively over Wei and the fish stall. I was discussing the harbor proposal with Mr. Chen, Victoria said. Robert looked confused. Chen, we're not related, are we? He laughed at his own joke. Wei Chen, Victoria clarified. He runs this fish stall and also happens to be a gifted pianist. Robert's expression registered vague recognition. Oh, right. The entertainment from the other night. Quite a party trick. He turned back to Victoria. Anyway, we have dinner reservations at the cliffside in 20 minutes. We should go before we absorb too much of the local atmosphere. He made a small gesture toward his nose. Wei saw Victoria's shoulders tense almost imperceptibly. Robert, I'm in the middle of a business discussion. I'll meet you at the restaurant. Robert looked between them, disbelief evident on his face. A business discussion here? He laughed again, the sound grating against Wei's ears. What business could possibly involve a fish? I believe Ms. Zhang asked you to leave, Wei interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. She'll meet you at the restaurant. Robert's face darkened. Excuse me? Do you know who I am? Yes, Wei said calmly. You're the man who wants to move the market to make room for condominiums that would sit empty most of the year. And you're the man who's making Ms. Zhang late for dinner. A tense silence fell between them. Robert looked to Victoria for support but found none in her carefully neutral expression. Fine, he said finally. Don't be too long, Vicky, and maybe change before dinner. With a last disparaging glance at Wei, he turned and walked away, shoulders stiff with indignation. When he was out of earshot, Victoria let out a small breath. Well, that was interesting. Wei immediately felt a wave of regret. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken to him that way. It could affect your business relationship. To his surprise, Victoria laughed, a genuine sound quite different from the polite chuckles he had heard at the celebration. Don't apologize. Robert Chen is a business associate, not a friend, and certainly not someone I'm having dinner with by choice. She shook her head. Sometimes investors need to be managed carefully, even the insufferable ones. Wei found himself smiling in response. This Victoria Zhang was not what he had expected. Less the cold businesswoman, more a person with her own frustrations and compromises. About the hotel performance, she said, returning to their earlier conversation. Would you consider it? It would be in 6 weeks, which should give you time to prepare. Wei thought about Mrs. Song's offer of Monday practice sessions, about the sheet music waiting in his apartment, about the feeling of the piano keys beneath his fingers. A part of him wanted to say yes immediately, but caution held him back. I'll think about it, he said finally. And about the harbor plans, too. Victoria nodded, seeming to understand his hesitation. That's fair. She reached into her bag and produced a business card. Call me when you decide, or if you have questions about either offer. Wei took the card, noting the embossed lettering and heavy paper stock. It felt like a token from another world, one he had glimpsed briefly at the town hall and might now have the chance to enter again on different terms. I should go, Victoria said, glancing at her watch. Before Robert sends a search party, as she turned to leave, Wei called after her. Ms. Zhang? She looked back. Thank you, he said simply, for the apology, and for keeping the market in your plans. Victoria's expression softened. Call me Victoria, and thank you for the music. It changed things. As Wei watched her walk away, those last words echoed in his mind. It changed things. He looked down at his hands, still rough, still bearing the marks of his trade, but now somehow different. These hands could gut fish and play Debussy. Perhaps they could do even more than he had ever imagined. 6 weeks passed in a blur of scales, arpeggios, and fish. Every Monday morning, Wei arrived at Mrs. Song's music shop at precisely 9 o'clock, his hands freshly scrubbed with lemon and salt, a mixture she had suggested to help with the persistent fish smell. By his third lesson, he had progressed from simple exercises to actual pieces, his natural talent blossoming under Mrs. Song's gentle guidance. You have a gift, she told him after he played through a Chopin prelude with only a few mistakes. Most students take years to develop the feeling you already have in your playing. Wei shook his head, embarrassed by the praise. I just copy what I hear. No, Mrs. Song insisted. You don't copy. You interpret. There's a world of difference. On regular days, Wei continued his work at the market, selling fish with the same care and attention he always had. But now he found himself humming melodies as he filleted, his fingers sometimes tapping out rhythms on the cutting board between customers. The music had seeped into his everyday life, changing even the most mundane tasks. The other vendors noticed the change in him too. Mei commented that he smiled more. Huang claimed Wei's fish tasted better, now that they're cut to music. Even old Mr. Chen, who rarely spoke to anyone, stopped by Wei's stall one afternoon and gruffly mentioned that his grandson was learning piano too. Good for the brain, the old man said. Keeps you sharp. As the date of the hotel reopening approached, Wei felt equal measures of excitement and terror. Victoria had called twice to confirm arrangements. He would play 3 short pieces during the cocktail hour, with the centerpiece being Clair de Lune. The hotel would provide a taxi to bring him from his apartment and take him home afterward. "You'll need a suit," Mrs. Song said during their final practice session before the event. "Something better than what you wore to the celebration." Wei looked down at his hands. "Will a suit make these look any different?" Mrs. Song followed his gaze to the rough, calloused fingers that still bore the marks of his trade, despite the careful moisturizing regimen she had prescribed. "Your hands are perfect just as they are," she said firmly. "They tell your story. Never be ashamed of them." The night of the hotel reopening arrived with unexpected rain, a steady drizzle that painted the streets of Port Haven in reflective silver. Wei stood before the small mirror in his apartment, adjusting the tie of his new suit, a purchase that had cost him nearly a week's earnings. The dark blue fabric was the same color as deep water on a clear day, a deliberate choice that acknowledged rather than disguised his connection to the sea. A soft knock interrupted his nervous preparations. Opening the door, he found Mei and Huang standing in the hallway, both dressed in their best clothes and grinning widely. "Surprise," Mei said, spinning in a circle to show off her emerald green dress. "We're your support team." Wei blinked in confusion. "What are you doing here? How did you know about tonight?" "Everyone knows," Huang said with a laugh. "The whole market is talking about it. Victoria Zhang's fancy hotel reopening with our very own fish maestro as the entertainment. We're not going to miss it," Mei added. "Half the market vendors are already on their way there." Wei felt panic rise in his chest. "What? No, it's a private event." "You can't just show up?" Huang's grin widened. "Actually, we can. Victoria came by the market yesterday and personally invited all the harbor vendors. Said it was important that the heart and soul of Port Haven be represented at the reopening." Wei stared at them, speechless. The thought of playing in front of strangers had been terrifying enough. Playing in front of people who had known him his entire life, who had seen him elbow deep in fish guts every day for years. That was a whole different kind of fear. "I can't do this," he said, his voice barely audible. Mei stepped forward and straightened his already straight tie. "Yes, you can. We've heard you humming and tapping for weeks now. The music is in your way, just let it out. Like you did at the celebration." A car horn sounded from the street below, the taxi Victoria had promised. "Time to go," Huang said, giving Wei a gentle push toward the stairs. "Your audience awaits." The newly renovated Golden Harbor Hotel gleamed like a jewel against the rainy night. The historic building, once the home of Port Haven's most successful shipping merchant, had been restored to its former glory under Victoria's direction. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the marble-floored lobby, where elegantly dressed guests mingled, champagne glasses in hand. At the center of it all stood a magnificent grand piano, larger and more imposing than the one at Town Hall. Wei approached it cautiously, aware of eyes following his progress across the room. He recognized many faces, not just market vendors, but customers, fishermen, dock workers, and town officials. It seemed as if half of Port Haven had turned out for the event. Victoria appeared at his side, elegant in a deep red dress that reminded Wei of sunset over the harbor. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "And you look wonderful." Wei managed a nervous smile. "I didn't know you had invited the entire town." "Not the entire town," Victoria said with a small laugh. "Just the important parts." She glanced around the room. "This hotel only exists because of Port Haven's maritime history. It seemed right to honor that connection tonight." She led him to the piano, where a small printed program rested on the music stand. "Whenever you're ready," she said. "No rush." Wei sat down on the bench, adjusting his position as Mrs. Song had taught him. The room gradually quieted as people noticed him at the piano. From the corner of his eye, he could see Mei and Huang giving him encouraging thumbs up. Mrs. Song stood nearby, her face filled with quiet pride. Wei placed his hands on the keys, those fishmonger's hands that had gutted thousands of fish, chopped countless blocks of ice, and wrapped innumerable packages in paper. Under the warm lights of the chandelier, he could see every scar, every callus, every mark of his profession. For a moment, doubt crept in. What was he doing here in this beautiful place among these well-dressed people? Then he remembered what Mrs. Song had told him. Your hands tell your story. Never be ashamed of them. Wei began to play. He started with a simple Bach piece, its clear structure and precise rhythms helping to calm his nerves. As the familiar patterns flowed from his fingers, he felt himself relax into the music. This was just another Monday morning practice session, he told himself. Just him and the piano speaking to each other. The second piece was a short, playful Schubert impromptu that Mrs. Song had selected to show off his improving technique. As he navigated its rippling passages, Wei found himself enjoying the challenge, even smiling slightly when he successfully managed a particularly tricky section. A warm round of applause followed. Wei glanced up to see Victoria standing near the piano, watching him with undisguised admiration. Behind her, Robert Chen wore a sour expression, clearly unhappy with the turn the evening had taken. Wei took a deep breath and positioned his hands for the final piece. Clair de Lune. This was the music that had started everything, the piece that had lived in his heart long before his fingers ever touched a keyboard. The opening notes fell like gentle raindrops, perfectly matched to the weather outside. Wei closed his eyes, letting the music flow through him. This time there was no nervousness, no self-consciousness, only the pure joy of creation, of bringing beauty into the world through his touch. The room faded away. The watching eyes, the elegant surroundings, even the expensive suit, all disappeared. There was only Wei and the music, having a conversation that needed no words. When the final chord faded into silence, Wei opened his eyes to find the room completely still. For a moment no one moved or spoke. Then Victoria began to applaud, and the entire gathering joined in, a thunderous response that seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers. As Wei stood and bowed, he caught sight of his fellow market vendors, Mei wiping away tears, Huang grinning broadly, old Mr. Chen nodding with gruff approval. They were applauding not just his playing, but his courage to step beyond the boundaries that had defined him for so long. After the performance, people surrounded Wei offering congratulations and, to his surprise, business cards. "My daughter needs a piano teacher," said a woman he recognized as a regular customer. "The new restaurant on Hill Street is looking for weekend entertainment," said another. "The school music program could use a volunteer," suggested Mayor Liu. Wei accepted the cards in a daze, overwhelmed by the sudden rush of possibilities. Later, as the crowd thinned and guests began to depart, Victoria found him sitting alone at the piano, quietly playing a simple melody. "That was beautiful," she said, sitting beside him on the bench. "What is it?" "Just something I'm working on," Wei admitted. "My own composition." Victoria's eyes widened. "You're composing too?" Wei shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Mrs. Song suggested I try. It's probably not very good." "It's lovely," Victoria said. "It sounds like Dawn at the Harbor." Wei smiled, pleased that she had heard exactly what he was trying to express. "That's what I was thinking of when I wrote it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Wei's fingers still moving softly over the keys. "The town council voted yesterday," Victoria said finally. "They approved my harbor renovation plan. Construction starts next month," Wei nodded. "I heard. May's already planning how to decorate her new stall." "And what about you?" Victoria asked. "What are you planning?" Wei's hands stilled on the keyboard. It was a question he had been asking himself for weeks now. What did he want? Who was he becoming? "I'll still sell fish," he said after a moment. "It's what I know. It's my family's business." Victoria nodded, waiting for him to continue. "But I'll keep playing too. Mrs. Song thinks I could teach beginners even with my limited experience, and maybe perform sometimes like tonight." He looked down at his hands, still a fishmonger's hands, but now a musician's too. "I don't have to be just one thing," Victoria smiled. "No, you don't. None of us do." She gestured toward the renovated hotel lobby. 10 years ago, I was a dock manager's daughter with big dreams. Now I'm running hotels and planning harbor renovations. Life doesn't put us in boxes. People do that." Wei thought about the box he had lived in for so long, the assumptions he had made about himself and his possibilities. It had taken a piano and the courage to touch it to show him that boxes could be opened, that boundaries could be crossed. "The new market will have that performance space," Victoria continued. "It would be wonderful to have regular music there. Something to draw people in, make them stay longer, see the harbor as more than just a place to buy fish." "Are you offering me a job?" we asked, half joking. "I'm offering you an opportunity," Victoria corrected. "What you make of it is entirely up to you." Outside, the rain had stopped. Through the hotel's large windows, Wei could see stars appearing in the clearing sky, their light reflecting in puddles along the street. Tomorrow he would be back at his stall, selling fish in the morning light. His hands would smell of the sea. His apron would be stained with work. But something had changed, not just in how others saw him, but in how he saw himself. "I should get home," he said, standing from the piano bench. "Early start tomorrow." Victoria stood too. "The taxi is waiting whenever you're ready." As Wei moved to leave, she touched his arm lightly. "Wei, thank you. Not just for playing tonight, but for reminding everyone that beauty can come from unexpected places." Wei smiled, thinking of his journey from fish stall to grand piano, from being defined by his smell to being defined by his music. "Sometimes," he said, "the most unexpected place is inside ourselves."